an example of a parallel system. So then we talk about how the job is broken down among the different processing units or the different independent autonomous units within the distributed computing system. The challenge of either distributed system or parallel system, the challenge is latency, is delay. There's always like delay in that system because of the back and forth between the memory and the processor and the overhead of even managing the different tasks that has to be loaded into the processing unit. So that was the problem, but the solution would be one of the many solutions would be to now combine, to now have a distributed system of parallel computers. So you understand? So there's parallel computing, different autonomous computers connected in a network. There is parallel computing, a computer system that has multiple processors but that is sharing one single memory unit. Now we now have parallel systems connected as if it's a distributed network within a distributed network, a number of parallel systems that can help to significantly minimize the time wasted from latency. So we talked about all of this. So we spent time yesterday to also look at Hadoop, the concept of Hadoop, and I think this is part of what we are going to be discussing in more details today. So we introduced the concept of Hadoop technology, which has to do with it's an open source platform that is developed to handle large volume of data. The data could be structured data or it could be unstructured data. And the Hadoop technology itself comprises of three key components from what we discussed yesterday. Those three components are, I want to call somebody in the class to quickly tell us what are the three key components of Hadoop. I'm not going to call Temilade. I want to see somebody else who is in the class yesterday. There is Fatima. So Fatima, were you in the class yesterday?
No, I wasn't in the class yesterday.
Okay, so I'm not going to call you. Okay, so Dorcas, what are the three components of Hadoop system, Hadoop framework? What are the three core components of Hadoop framework? Is Dorcas, are you there?
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me.
So were you in class yesterday? Okay, the voice quality is not even coming out. The voice quality is not coming out very clearly. Sorry, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm really sorry about the network.
Okay, let's ask Ekwi. Ekwi, what are the three core components of Hadoop framework? Your microphone is muted. Hi, Ekwi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, okay, I'm here, but great. I don't know the answer.
Oh wow, interesting. Okay, so tell me, Temilade, you were in the class yesterday. What are the three core components of Hadoop?
I'm sorry, I can't remember, to be honest. And unfortunately, I'm not where my notes is. My notes, I forgot my notes at home. Okay. And I'm not there. I would have spied at least.
Okay, so Dorcas typed it. Dorcas quickly spied it in her textbook. So she typed it. She wrote HDFS, YARN, and MapReduce. Of course, I think Dorcas got it. Or just that her voice, the voice quality from her PC couldn't allow us to hear us. We hear her very well. So there are three key components of Hadoop. Number one is HDFS. HDFS is like the file system. It's what represents if for any system, for any computing system, there are three key elements. One is the processor, or anything that acts like a processor, like the brain. The other one is the memory space. The memory space is like the space where where jobs are executed. And the third is the file system, or like the disk drive. So within the Hadoop framework, the three core components are HDFS. This you cannot forget this at all. Like this is extremely fundamental to this particular course. I think it's too fundamental, and it's also too basic that it might not necessarily come out in the exam, but it's something that you need to know anytime that you are engaging anybody as a data scientist or as a data engineer. It's fundamentals, and you need to be able to engage on this fundamental level. So you have the HDFS, which is like a file management system. It's a file management system within the Hadoop framework. It's the logical location where the data itself is stored, and we are going to be demonstrating more of it later in the class today. Then you also have the MapReduce engine. The MapReduce engine, it's an engine. It's just like a piece of algorithm. It's a piece of algorithm that divides the job into smaller units. We said it's big data. The problem with big data is that the data is just too big that you may not have enough space in order to be able to manage it. So as a solution, in order to solve that problem, they came up with the concept of distributed computing, where you can have many computers and take that big data job and spread it across all of those computers. So, what is that piece of algorithm that breaks the job down into smaller components within the Hadoop framework? It is the MapReduce engine. And when the result is completed, it also combines all of those results and presents it back to the user. Then there is another piece of software that does all the housekeeping job, the platform management and stuff like that. That is yet another resource negotiator. Is called AI. So those are the things that we discussed yesterday. Then I think we also spent time to talk about. So we talked about HDFS in a lot more details. Then also spoke about cloud computing, where we said for cloud computing, it's a method of computing that provides shared resource computing on the internet. So you can have you can have an application developed on the internet. You can have infrastructure. So instead of you buying hard disk space, you have a lot of data. You have a lot of data. You want to go and buy external hard drive. Instead of buying external hard drive, which is physical, you can go and buy a space in the cloud, like Google Drive and Dropbox, exactly, Dropbox, Google Drive. Those are an example of cloud storage applications. It's an example of cloud infrastructure, storage applications.
Those cloud storage,
they are safe. They are very safe. It's unlikely that what you have on Google Cloud is going to go corrupt, or like it's going to be infected by virus or something. Yes.
Like somebody still airdrop. One of the biggest problems people have with airdrop, or people have with airdrop, is the fact that people access their files.
Speak up so that those that are at the other side can hear you.
I said that airdrop, Apple owns their own cloud computing
Platform.
Which is airdrop. So I was like, one of the problems that airdrop has is the fact that people could access private information on somebody else's private information on airdrop, which was why I was asking if it was safe.
Okay, so
I didn't get the conversation.
you cannot get the conversation.
No, I didn't.
I'm moving the computer close to him so that he can speak into the microphone. Let me raise his voice a bit. Okay, so over to you, and introduce yourself because they've not met you before, but let's make the class interactive. His concern is about the security of some of those cloud platforms. Over to you. Edgar.
My name is Ayomide, and I was asking Mr. Blessing about how safe most of these cloud computing platforms are. For example, Apple's cloud computing platform, AirDrop, wasn't particularly safe or isn't particularly safe. A lot of people who used Apple had issues with the AirDrop because some of their information were accessed on. So I was like, I wasn't sure if most of these platforms are that safe. The experience is top notch.
So did you get that? Sammy, did you hear that?
And what I understood was that it was asking about the safety of cloud computing. Apple users are sometimes unsure about the safety of AirDrop.
Exactly. So thanks a lot for that kind of video. Also, until recently, until November, December last year, we've always thought that it is not likely for Google to go down, that it's unlikely for AWS to go down. But sometime in November last year, one of the AWS mirrors in maybe East California or something was down for like almost half of a day, for like 12 hours before they brought it back up. Google was down late last year too for some hours, and people were scared because they could no longer access their Google Drive, they could no longer access their email. Some people could not access YouTube and the content that they loaded on YouTube. So before now, we have always thought that these platforms are foolproof, but with COVID, a lot of things happened in the year 2020 that made us to think differently. So we just need to update our understanding of how some of those things work. And then also, some years back, Google, Yahoo is a cloud platform. In fact, Hadoop platform, yes, Yahoo is, yeah. So in fact, Yahoo is part of the Yahoo. It's part of those companies that invented the Hadoop architecture itself. At some point, some guys hacked into Yahoo and they swept people's password, up to like 50 million password from Yahoo. And for some people, they locked their Yahoo account and they had to pay some money in order to be able to access it. I think I was affected, and what Yahoo had to do was Yahoo had to like wipe the hook of my email, and I lost every content that I had in my Yahoo box. So to a large extent, it's believed that those platforms are safe, or compared to the physical infrastructure that can be damaged, that can be stolen, that can be corrupted by antivirus, that can be destroyed by fire or whatever. But for the cloud platform, it's like this computer, it's in the cloud now. 5 of us are connected to this PC and we are accessing it and we're getting our job done seamlessly. So the advantages that cloud bring to computing is significantly lot more than the disadvantages. It's also a lot cost effective. So it's a lot cost effective, a lot more cost effective. So you can just buy like maybe a 5 gigabyte, a 10 gigabyte space on Google Drive, for instance. If it gets filled up, you can go and buy more space. But if you are going to buy an external hard drive, you have to go and buy like maybe 1 terabyte and hold that 1 terabyte, even though all the space that you're using in it is not more than 100 gigabytes out of it. So it helps you to scale. It's reliable. It's very like it's very reliable. Now back to your question about Google, about AirDrop. I'm actually getting to hear about that for the first time, but I do not want to say that it's not possible. Although it is highly, Apple is one of the most secure platforms. Even you cannot hack an Apple phone compared to how you can hack an Android phone. You cannot hack it. So that there was compromise on AirDrop platform, and it's maybe some people had a backdoor access to the data that is there. I need to go and research that and find out exactly what happened. Yeah. Okay. So so that is cloud computing. Cloud computing actually makes life a lot more easy for users. And also making reference to some of the questions that Dorcas asked yesterday. It can be cost effective. It can be cost effective compared to having physical platform on site or on premise. And a lot of banks in Nigeria today are migrating to the cloud. Originally, when the cloud concept came, there was no, we are used to, IT guys are always like, we are used to doing things in this particular way. I always have my stuff done on premise. I go to the server room to start up a server or to shut down a server. Now I have to go to the cloud, man. I have to go and learn new things. So at times you want to protect your own stuff. But I think banks are also like becoming a lot more flexible. Some of their platform are now going to the cloud. So if you do USSD banking, it's sitting somewhere in the cloud. If you do online banking, all of their platform are now hosted in the cloud. They are no longer like on premise the way it used to be on premise. But of course, you also have witnessed that banks at times will be complaining that there's a downtime. So if the network,
I can't hear you.
oh, you can't hear me?
Your voice is not clear.
Oh wow. Okay, so I'm going to fix that. Let me just find another way of fixing it. So
this. Okay, so what about now? Can you hear me right now?
This is actually much better.
Please, can you say that again?
Sorry about that. Do I sound better now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, so we're just discussing about the security of online platform and the advantages of online platforms. So the cloud platforms, they are scalable, they are elastic, they are low cost, and they are usually fault tolerant. They are fault tolerant. Then the part that we did not discuss yesterday was the part I think we did not discuss yesterday was in-memory computing. And in-memory computing, the way it works, I think I took some time to explain how in-memory computing would normally work. In-memory computing has to do with the implementation that has So before now, with the processor of a computer and the memory of a computer, they exist independently. And it's like a bus system. So that bus system is like a transportation system between the memory and the processor. So whenever you want to execute a job, the processor makes reference to the memory that has the job loaded on it, transfer the job to the processor and get it executed, and then once the result is completed, it writes it back to the memory, and then the memory writes it back to maybe the disk space whenever you want to save it. But when you are dealing with big data, that means there is going to be a lot of back and forth between the memory and the processor. So is it possible for us to now have the memory designed on top of the processor so that you can now minimize the back and forth between the memory and the processor? So that is what led to the concept of in-memory computing. So computing always wants to save three things: want to save time, want to save space, and want to save cost. Those are three things that computing tries to save. So essentially, that is the whole idea around in-memory computing. It's essentially to be able to minimize the time that it takes to execute job. So you have a big data job that is passed on to an in-memory computer, and it makes the job available to business user. It makes the accessibility of the job is a lot faster, because before now, it would have required some time for the memory to go to a particular location to copy the data and present it for the user to be able to access. But if it's in-memory computing, it means that you are actually modifying the job, you are processing the job right in there in memory, and it's almost like going to be available in near real time. There are a few other questions that are here. Of course, if you've been set up on the Daska learning environment, I want to find out, have you been set up on the Daska learning environment?
Yes.
You have not?
My system has very low space. So
okay.
I have to get a new location.
Okay. Okay, so I want to confirm. So April, do you have the virtual learning environment set up for you?
No.
Okay, you probably need to bring your PC, although you can download it. But what about, do you have access to have you set up your profile on daska.org?
No.
Okay, so there are a few things that we need to do. So also yes, that is the site, exactly. So this material that I'm using, you can also have access to this material that I'm using for the training, exactly. Yeah. Say that again.
Shouldn't someone have sent us a mail? I didn't know that we had to go and set up our profile on daska.org.
So, I think maybe those guys, maybe they've not gotten, so they need to get some. They need to get some keys from Daska. So if they have not received it yet, I think they may not be able to send that to you. So just I'll confirm from them so that against next week at least we can have that properly set up. I think we're having a meeting with the Daska team in the US on Tuesday. So all of that will be sorted by then.
Okay.
Okay, so today, as I said, today we are going to be talking more around the understanding of the Hadoop ecosystem itself. So let's look at what exactly the Hadoop ecosystem, what it entails. So this is more detail around the discussion that we started yesterday. So today we are going to be looking at the various components of the Hadoop ecosystem itself. We'll discuss HDFS in much more detail than we did yesterday. We also talk about MapReduce and Yarn. There's currently MapReduce version 2. The version 3 is in beta, is undergoing beta testing. So maybe later this year they are also going to release MapReduce version 3. But we will talk about Yarn, we'll talk about MapReduce, we'll talk about how to store data in a Hadoop component that is called HBase. We'll talk about Hive. If time permits us, we'll talk about Hive, and then we also discuss the role of other components like Zookeeper, Scoop, OZ, Flu. These are interesting stuff. Before now, I think sometime in 2016 when I saw this stuff, so they scared me. They seemed like a very, very big deal, but they are not a big deal. And how you see Hadoop itself is like it's like an ecosystem. When you see Microsoft Office, Microsoft Office is not a software. Microsoft Office is an ecosystem that comprises of many tools. Microsoft Office has Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office has Excel, has Microsoft Access, has Microsoft Publisher, has Microsoft, has a whole lot of things inside it. But Microsoft Office itself is not a software. Sure, you understand, it's not a software. So you also need to think about Hadoop. That's in Hadoop itself is not, it's a framework. It's a framework. Yeah. So Hadoop was developed because of the practical way it manages big data. You know, it was like the Yahoo guys and the Google guys were the guys that originally had this particular technology, and after they used it for a very long time, so they had to release it into the market under an open license. Open source license, under an open source license. So today, nobody exactly owns Hadoop, so it's open to anybody. I can take it and modify it and release it back into the market. But whatever modification I do on it, I also need to release it to everybody in the market to be able to access. You know, so the guys that make money from Hadoop, how they make money from Hadoop is by providing support, maintenance and support services for the people that are using whatever flavor that they have developed. The core component of Hadoop, as we agreed some minutes ago, or according to what Docker said to us, is there are 3 HDFS,
Yarn, MapReduce,
Thank you. So there is Yarn, and there is Hadoop MapReduce, and there is HDFS. So in version 1, it was just MapReduce and HDFS. They were core components of the version 1 of Hadoop, yes. But in version 2, they now also develop the Yarn component to be able to manage some other components of the Hadoop processes. So MapReduce and HDFS provide the basic structure and services that is needed. They are like the core, they are the most, like they are the very basic, they are very, 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 very basic. Yeah, but of course, what Yarn now does, it does housekeeping job. We now provide information which resource is available, which resource is not available. For the resource that is available, which process will need that resource that is available, and then it assigns the process to the resource that is available. But beyond these 3 core components, there are other elements of the Hadoop framework which we're also going to be discussing. So under the Hadoop ecosystem, it's an ecosystem, as I said, like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, under Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access, under Microsoft as Office. Yes. So the core components are HDFS, MapReduce Yarn, HBase, Hive, P, Scoop, Zookeeper, Flume, and OZ. So you'll be wondering, these things are just too much. Yes. So it depends on what you want to do. If you want to work on a spreadsheet, you go and work with Microsoft Excel. If you want to type a letter to someone, you go and do Microsoft Word. If you want to do presentation, you do Microsoft PowerPoint. The same way in Hadoop, for where to store your data, your file, if it's a file that you want to store, it is HDFS. The component that does divide and conquer, that divides the job and distribute it among the processing unit that need to execute it, it's MapReduce. The one that does the housekeeping job, I will explain that to you later on, is Yarn. The one that stores data that is not completely structured. If you have data that is not very structured, it's HBase. If you have data that is structured into rows and columns, like your traditional relational database system, like Oracle, Microsoft Access, MySQL, stuff like that, it is Hive that does that. Pig is a scripting language. If you want to read, it's like a scripting language, something like your PHP, that you used to give command to those applications, Then Scoop is like a data migration tool. In fact, I've simply run through everything that is in this chapter. I've simply gone through everything. Scoop is like a data migration tool. You want to move data from one point to another point. You use Scoop to do it. And for those that have worked with Microsoft SSIS before, there is what they call Microsoft SSIS. It's a tool that you can use to migrate data from, say, Oracle database to Microsoft SQL Server database. So Scoop does that data migration. If you want to
is it if you're trying to remove the data within Hadoop, or if you're trying to move it to something else?
Whether it's within Hadoop or from an external system into Hadoop, or you want to move from Hadoop to Hadoop, Scoop can get the job done.
Can you move from Hadoop to another?
Yes, you can move from Hadoop to Oracle. You can move from Oracle to Hadoop. You move from MySQL to Hadoop. Yeah, so that is what Scoop does. Zookeeper, of course, like a Zookeeper, it does housekeeping job for all of these different components, just like the way Yarn does it. Yarn does it for the core components, while Zookeeper does it for every other component. And then you also have Flume, you also have OZ. OZ is like a, if you have, what example can I give for OZ? OZ is like something they call, it's a workflow management system. Workflow management
helps you keep the workflow that it doesn't scatter, you don't get confused while you're working.
Sorry, there's a background noise. I don't know where it's coming from.
Can you see? Is this still on? Can you still hear it?
No, it stopped now.
Okay. I don't know. I wasn't hearing it. I didn't hear that. So workflow is like, okay, you want to automate your job. You have some job, you want to automate the job that you want to do. So a workflow system can help you to set, this is the first thing I want you to do. Move the data, use Scoop to move the data from this point to this point. After you move it to this point, run this pick command on the data in order to be able to like maybe manipulate it in a particular way. After doing that, then load it into Hive. After loading it into Hive, then, and so on and so forth. So this is like a workflow. This is like a workflow.
It's just something that helps you keep your work goal setting.
It's not necessarily goal setting. It's like sequencing your work in a particular order. Yes, so it helps you to sequence your job in a particular order. So that is what workflow job. So that is exactly what Flume does, and it has a GUI interface. Ozi. Okay, so this is an expanded picture that shows all the different components of Hadoop itself. So there are different distributions of Hadoop. It's an open source platform, but there are different, the Apache version, it's the open source version. The one from Apache, it's the open source version. But beyond the one from Apache, you have Hortonworks. I think Hortonworks has 75% of the market share. Then you have Cloudera. Cloudera is also there. You have Intel has its own. AWS, on AWS Cloud, there's also Hadoop on AWS Cloud. So if you want to do a Hadoop job, you can actually load it on AWS EMR. There's also MapR, which is also another distribution of Hadoop. Then in terms of related technology, what other technology that looks like Hadoop? Twitter has its own. Twitter also went ahead to develop something that looks like Hadoop, and it's called the Twitter Storm. So when you send a tweet, you just imagine how are those guys able to organize all of those data together in such a way that you can send a tweet, you can refer back to somebody's tweet that is sent in 2014. You can quickly do a search to see what is trending. You can know what is trending and sort it in a particular order. So the Twitter guys went to develop their own Hadoop type of technology, and that is called Twitter Storm. You can read up on that. There is Dremel, there is HPCC. I don't think the Twitter Storm is an open source. I don't think Twitter is an open source platform. But what those guys do is that after they have used it for a while, and that's why you don't have another platform that looks exactly like Twitter today. So after they've used it for maybe 20 years, they can release it into the market again. So in another 10, 20 years from now, you now start seeing applications that look like Twitter. But these guys have already gained, they're already ahead. That is what Yahoo and Google did with Hadoop itself. That's what they did. So WhatsApp too. Is it Facebook? Google. There is not Flutterwave. What is it called? There is TensorFlow. There's a TensorFlow framework recently released into the market by Google also. It's a technology that they've been using for a very long time for machine learning and for deep learning, for image classification and image identification. After they've used it for so many years, they are now releasing it into the market under open source technology. So essentially, that is how it works. So in terms of the other related project, the core components, core components first. So for core components, you have MapReduce, HDFS, and Yarn. And then for related projects, you have Pig, you have Hive, HBase, you have Avro, you have Flume, you have Mahout, you have Cascading, you have Scoop, you have a whole lot of them. But just the same way, PowerPoint, you may not know how to use PowerPoint, but you might be an expert in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. But the day you might need to use PowerPoint, you just go and grab it and look for the syntax. How does this thing work? I want to use it for my presentation. So the most important thing you need to learn is what does any of this, what do they do? Sure, you understand. Once you understand what they do, when you need to do a project with them, you just need to know what framework to call or what components of Hadoop to call in order for you to be able to implement your project. Please, I want to pause a bit. Please feel free to ask me any question if you have any question. Okay, so going into the details now. Do you have any question? Okay, so going into the details now. Let's go into some details. I think I spent some time yesterday to talk about HDFS. HDFS is a logical file system where the file system, where you file or where the data is stored. So if you have what's it called now? You have a Microsoft Word document. If you have a Microsoft Word document, for instance, that you wish to store on a Hadoop system, for instance, the HDFS is that file system that determines the location, is that location where you are going to be storing the file. Although it is not the actual location, it's a logical location, it's not the physical location. The physical location is still going to be your hard disk drive, that is where it is stored. But it's like that logical location. Yeah. So it's very flexible. It is also very tough at the same time, and it exploits a clustered approach by replicating your data across multiple systems. We are going to be looking at some of those features of HDFS later on. So HDFS, Temilade asked a question yesterday about HDFS, because I said HDFS has a lot of replica, creates a lot of replica. So when I say a lot of replica, if in a cluster, if a cluster, or let me use what you are conversant with, a distributed system. So in a distributed system, let's call it a cluster. A distributed system that has 4 computers in it, for instance, 4 computers in it. So in those 4 computers, for example, so this is a cluster. So if Hadoop on this particular computer and you need to save a file on HDFS, that file is replicated on this machine. It's on another cluster, So maybe these are things that are within the same cluster. Hello?
I couldn't hear you at the time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for calling my attention to that. I think I turned my back to the camera because I was right on the board actually, and you cannot see, you are not seeing the board. But let me verbally explain it. This is just to be able to drive down the point I made yesterday when you asked the question about replication of data. So the way Hadoop works is that, or the way HDFS on Hadoop, the way it works is that it allows you to write data once and then you access it multiple times. So what that means is that even when you need to do an update, that update does not override what you have written before. So what the update does is that it goes to write another version and it differentiates this new version that is written from the old version with a timestamp. So with a timestamp, you can differentiate between this version and the next and the other version. Now, how does the replication work? Replication is done within the same disk and also within the same network and within the same cluster, or within the same cluster. That is how replication is done in such a way that if a disk fails, you can still have access to the data. If a network fails, you can still have access to the data on a disk that is on another network. This is very depicted in a diagram, but unfortunately, I don't. Let me see if I can draw on a board. Let me see if I can draw. I'll just ask Emmanuel for a board marker pen or a light pen. Emmanuel. Yeah. So I want to write so that I want to explain something. So I just want to write on the board. So white marker. How do I bring out that white marker board? Where's chat? Yes. Okay. Where's it? Okay. So so do you have what you used to write on the board? What you used to write on the screen?
The pen. Did you take the pen away from this?
It's in my office now. Check. So does this mean that it's still loading the whiteboard?
No,
okay, great. Okay, so I write here. It's not writing.
Is this pen? Is it pen touch? It's not pen touch, it's not.
Oh, it's not pen touch. Okay, so. Okay, thank you. Okay. I suppose maybe it was this. I think it was disabled or so. Okay, so I'll just quickly do a very short diagram. So say this is this is not nice, slow. Yes, so then I will use. I just want to quickly demonstrate how it works. So okay, so look at this. In your in the traditional relational database system, or maybe even a typical spreadsheet like Excel, if I write here 1, 2, 3, 4, and to 10, yes. So I've written, if I want to update this, I can just come in here and do an update and update what is inside the cell. And I make it 2, and I make it, pardon?
I can't see the whiteboard.
And I make it 4, and so on. Oh, you can't see the whiteboard? Oh, yes, but can you see a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet?
No.
Okay, so hold on.
What I'm seeing is introduction to HDFS.
Okay, so I want to share my entire screen. Okay. I guess you can. You can see a spreadsheet now, right?
Not yet.
Oh. Online, there's always a setback. Technology will always have issues, Okay, so I was actually trying to share my screen, but it's not showing. But this is strange. So let me take it back a bit. Can you see? Okay, yes, you can see. You can see a spreadsheet now, right?
Yes, I can.
On my screen.
I can see a spreadsheet, and you've written 1, 2, 3 in cell D.
Hi, Dorcas. Can you see a spreadsheet on my screen? You can, right? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, the traditional relational database system, or in the in a traditional spreadsheet system, for instance, if you want to update your data, to update the data, it's very simple. So say this is the data that we have, and let's extend this one to say 20. If you want to update this now, you just go to this cell. If you want to update cell D1, you just go to the cell and update it to 2. Cell D3 is updated to 4, and then you update everything and you overwrite what was there before. And yeah, so what was there before, they are all gone. You have new data in there. Anytime you need to update, you can just go and do your update statement, or just write into the cell and the data is updated. But Hadoop, it does not work that way. Hadoop does write once and read many times. That is the concept of Hadoop. So the way the way it happens in Hadoop is this, or the way it happens on HDFS is this, where it's, so before we had 1, and 2, and so on. So we had this before. So we had this before. If you want to update this, instead of updating it, you would need to create another version. So this is another version. And this cell, assuming this cell is D, and this cell will still be D. This cell will also be D. But for this particular cell that is D, the version at a particular time, the version of this cell at a particular time was 1. But after you updated it, the new version is now 2. So how do you differentiate between the first D and the other D? Is a timestamp, is a property. So for every cell or for every data element, there's a timestamp that defines the version of that data at that particular point in time. So with that, you can even use that to rebuild. When your data becomes corrupt, you can use that to rebuild the data that you have lost, because you have kept the version over a particular period of time. So I hope, I think I explained that yesterday, but I hope Team Lade gets it this time around. So back to our slide. The voice is not clear, so I can't hear you very well. You can type exactly. You can type it in the message area so that I can read it out, because the voice is not coming out very clearly. Okay, so so HDFS allow users to write once and to read the file as many times as possible. So it allows users to write file once at a time of the file creation, that avoids any coherence issue that might result in replication of the data. In the bank, so let me give you some real life example of this in the bank and how it works in the bank. So when you generate it, when you go to bank and you want to withdraw money over the counter, and say it's 10,000 naira, and the teller gives you hands over 10,000 naira to you. So let's assume the teller mistakenly entered 10,000 naira instead of 1,000 naira. She does not go and delete that entry. The teller does not go and delete that entry. What the teller will do is that the teller will enter a reversal. Will enter a reversal of the 10,000 naira. We will reverse that transaction and now enter the proper one of 1,000 naira. Do you get it? So you went to the bank. You were supposed to get 1,000 naira. You got the 1,000 naira, but mistakenly the teller entered 10,000 naira on the system. Is it not just to go and like add 9,000 naira to maybe I done minus 10,000? Is it not just to add 9,000 to it so that it will at least overwrite? It will overwrite it and bring it to 1,000. But it does not do that. It does not. That data does not ever get updated. So whatever transaction you have generated like 5 years ago, if you go to the bank, you are always going to find it. It does not get updated. So the way they created that table in the bank is such a way that you will not be able to update it ever and ever. So what now happens is that it's you are yawning because you cannot relate to it. Next week, we are going to have a practical session next week. So at least if you have set up your PC, you'll be able to relate to it more. So what now happens is that once that mistake is done, but instead of overwriting or updating that entry, a new entry is written, another entry is written, which is called like a reversal entry. So then the correct posting is now posted. That is exactly how it's done. So in HDFS would support like a core banking platform, because most of the transactions that we generate in the bank, they are not updated. You just write it once and you need to read it as many times as you might need to read it. Unlike other file systems that are constantly read and write, HDFS reads data only once and writes and reads it many times after. You get it. It writes once and reads it many times thereafter. So what does the architecture look like? And this architecture is very, very important. I encourage people to understand this architecture. Why you need to understand the architecture? This is the theory of the architecture. If you understand it, when you are programming a Hadoop system, when you understand what the architecture looks like, you'll be a better programmer than somebody that just gets into the computer and just starts writing programs. And at some point, there is going to be somebody that is going to take over from me, that is going to lead the session that require a lot of programming. So it's better you understand the basics, the fundamentals. So assuming this is a Hadoop cluster. This is a cluster, and I showed you an example of this rack server. So assuming this, so this is like a this is a rack server. This is pardon?
It almost okay. I can see your screen now. I was seeing only the example before.
Okay. Okay, so I think it's a bit. Oh wow. I've gone past the Excel long before now, so I'm surprised that you're just seeing my screen. So this is a rack. This is a rack, and these are servers that are mounted in the rack. These are servers mounted in the rack. At the back of this server, look at it. There is networking. So these servers, they are connected in a way that it now becomes like a distributed system.
Very expensive.
Okay, so the last time we got this, for each of these slots, we got each of these slots about 3 million naira in 2019. And it depends on the type of specification that you build. It can be more expensive than that. It can be cheaper than that. But we got each of these slots for 3 million naira. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is about 18 million naira if it was 2019. But the rack itself, there's a different price for the rack, because that is where it is mounted. You can actually have a rack that only have maybe 2 of these mounted in it. Yes, you can get one for yourself. You can set up one in your house. Yeah, you can set up one in your house for your own personal use, for your own. There are guys that people come and consult them, and they need a high-end system in their home that they need to get their job done. Yes. Yes, you can connect it to be accessed by outside source. Yes, depending on how you want to configure it. In fact, even with your MTN router, you can connect your MTN router in such a way that it can connect to this and somebody from the outside can access what you have in here. Yeah, so, but again, the cloud computing has now made it easy. By the time you spend 18 million naira, you can see that that's a whole lot of money. And if there's now a fire outbreak in that building, that means 18 million naira is gone. You understand? So why not just spend maybe 5 million naira in the cloud? 5 million naira in the cloud will probably give you access to everything that this can give you access to. And if you have, let's say, a fiber cable connected to your home, for instance, if that fiber cable gets cut, anybody that needs to access this will not be able to access it. So those are the motivations for going the cloud way. You understand? So this is the front side. This is the front side. These are the servers. The front side that you can see. This is like the back part. At the back part you can see cables. This blue stuff. These are cables. These are cables that are connecting what you have at the front end. Yeah. So this is this is the same as this set of servers that are connected together. So this can form a cluster. This is like a cluster. This is like a cluster, which is a collection of a number of pieces that are connected together. So in each of these clusters, there are going to be some Hadoop components in each of these clusters. So what it means is that we are going to be installing the Hadoop software on this server, and on this server, and on this server, and on this server, and on this server, in order to form a Hadoop cluster. So the same way, like here you have six servers. So you store Hadoop software here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. So you can form like a six node cluster, a 6-node Hadoop cluster. Yeah. So commodity server, what you have here as commodity server is each of these is a commodity server. You can actually go to the market and buy a commodity server and slot it into the rack, so that is what you have there. So for each of these commodity server, when you install the Hadoop software on it, there are 3 key components that gets installed on it, and those are the Hadoop 3 core components. That is your HDFS, MapReduce, and YARN. So you understand, those are the components that are installed there. Now, for HDFS, what are the elements of HDFS? So the element of HDFS, you have what is called the name node and what is called the data node. The name node is like an address book. It's like an address book. While the data node is like the information itself. You understand? It's like the data itself. So whenever you want to store a piece of information, the location where you are storing that information is on the data node, while the And okay, the location where the data is stored, the actual location where the data is stored is the data node. Why the address book that is referencing where you store the data is on the name node. So, and why that is important is that we want to be able to access the data as quickly as possible. There are, in this example, we said that there are 6 blade servers that are here. So I want to search for something. So it will take me time to go and search server 1. If I don't find it, I go to server 2, then I go to server 3 and server 4 before I eventually find it. And the data is so much that I don't have that time to start going from one point to the other. So can I hold an address book? I'm trying to like simplify it. I'm trying to it's the computer that does the search. It's the computer that does the search. Even though it's computer, it can take a long time for computer to search for some things because the data is so much. And because it's so much, you don't want the computer to spend a lot of time. You don't want computer to spend 1 minute to search it. Because if computer spend 1 minute to search it, so imagine a bank that has 10 million customers. You want to search for your account balance, and the computer is spending 1 minute to search for it, and you have 10 million customers. So you need 10 million minutes in order to search for each time customer wants to query his data. So that's a lot of time. You want the data to return as fast as possible. You understand? So you will hold that address book. The address book is in this case, the address book is the name node, while the data node is the location. So so let's look at the ADFS follows it follows a master-slave architecture. So who is the master here? The name node is the master, while the data nodes are the slaves, and the file is divided. So the file that you want to save, any file that you want to write on a Hadoop cluster, the file is divided into a number of blocks. So it's divided into one or more blocks which are stored on the data node. The name node master server performs the operations such as if you want to open a data node, or you want to open a file, you want to close a file, you want to rename a file, or you want to rename a directory. It is the name node that performs all of those operations. So you want to open a file to write into one file. It is name node that performs that operation. You want to rename a file. It is name node that performs it. You want to close a file that is open. It is name node that performs all of those operations. So it is good you understand this architecture. So name node. The ADFS works by breaking a large piece of data into blocks, into what is called blocks, and the blocks are stored on the name node. So imagine there is Nigeria NIN, Nigeria identity number, for instance, national identity number. So they want to register 200 million people. So imagine they are writing those 200 million people on one single Excel file. You can imagine that is going to be a whole lot of data. Sure, you understand? Yeah. It's a whole lot of data. So imagine how long it will take to open that Excel file. If you've attempted to open some file before, you see that it will take a long time to open. That may even slow down your PC. So the concept is that, can we break this large file down into smaller nodes? Even though it's like one file, but we break it down into smaller components and then distribute it across all the disk spaces or all the blocks that are available. So it is the responsibility of the name node to know the block on which the data node make up a complete file. So the NIN database, 200 million record, on one single Excel file, we want to store it on a HDFS platform. What it does is that it will break it down into smaller components. So you can break it into maybe 26 pieces. Anything that starts with A goes into one block. Anything that starts with B goes to another block. Anything that starts with C goes to another block until it gets to the 26th one. So now, it is now the name node that knows that anytime that I'm looking for anything that starts with A, this is the block I should go and look for it. Anytime I'm looking for what starts with B, this is the block I go to look for it. So, so name node holds that information. It's like an address book for where the data is stored. What it means is that name node is very critical. So it means that if nothing is wrong with the data, but name node crashes, if anything crashes, if anything happens with name node, it means that the data will no longer be accessible. Do you agree? But I want to ask someone. Let me ask Dorcas. Why would name node be very critical in this situation? Why do you think name node will be very critical for this particular architecture? Your microphone is muted. Okay, maybe Dorcas is not there. Ekwi, please, can you help us with that?
Okay, following the explanation that you gave, you said that the name node is responsible for opening. So if I can't open the door to a house, how can I access the information that I have inside the house, for example? So for me, that's why I think it's critical.
Thank you. So name node is like an address book, as she said. It's like an address book. If you want to access the house, for instance, there is a map that shows you where you can find what in that house, or maybe a library. If you've been to a school library before, it's a catalog that shows where you can find books on anatomy or books on science. If that catalog, if something gets wrong with it, so it will even be very, very difficult for you to be able to access anything in that library, because you don't even know exactly where to go to find that stuff. So it means that if you have only one name node, then there's going to be a problem if anything happens to that name node. So because of that, there's also replication of name nodes. Name node is also replicated. And so name node is critical to the operation of the cluster. And because of that, it's replicated to guard against a single point of failure. So data node constantly, so back to the diagram. So data node, this data node, they constantly communicate with the name node because a data node may actually fail. Let's go back to this diagram. So in this diagram, look at this. There are about 6 servers here. So let's assume maybe the name node is on this particular server. There's a replica. So let's say the original name node is on this server, and let's say the replica is on this particular server, for instance. And then there are data nodes across all the different 6 servers that are here, for instance. All the data nodes that are on each of these servers, from time to time, they will be communicating with the name node. And why they need to that communication is that name node need to know if they are alive and if they are available. So that immediately they are no longer available, it can look for a replica and then immediately reference that replica whenever it needs to access data at any particular point in time. So through a process that is called heartbeat, there is communication between the name node, and the data node, and this is a continuous process. It happens it's continuous and it's consistent behavior, which alerts the name node about the availability of the data node. Why that is important again is that it guarantees that a name node is available. Anytime that is no longer available, then you just know that you need to look for a replica. Okay, so I hope it's getting interesting. So let's look at data node. The data node provides what is called heartbeat message to detect and to ensure connectivity between it and the name node. When a heartbeat is no longer present, it means that the data node is no longer available. So the name node maps the data node from the cluster and keeps on operating as if nothing happened. So if So let's look at this diagram. So here's a Hadoop cluster. Here's a Hadoop cluster. And in this cluster, there's a commodity server 1, there's a commodity server 2, and there's a commodity server 3. And for each of these, there are different data nodes. So this particular server has 2 data nodes on it. This particular server has only 1 data node on it. This particular server has only 1 single data node on it. Sure, you understand? So now, from time to time, there will be communication between the data node and the name node. There will be communication, you understand? And while there is that communication, you say that I'm available, you can write to me. I'm available, you can open me. I'm available, you can access the data that is inside of me. Anytime that the heartbeat is no longer available. So for this name node and for this particular data node, the heartbeat is no longer available. It means that the data here is no longer accessible at that particular point in time. But of course, because there's going to be a replica of whatever you have here on either this and this and this, it's never going to be a problem for there to be no heartbeat. You know, so let's look at some of the features of NameNode. So what are those features that NameNode has that makes it possible for it to be able to do whatever it does? Number one is that it keeps a transaction log. It keeps a transaction log. Where's my spreadsheet? I'll open my spreadsheet again. Here's my spreadsheet. So this is this data. This is this data. Someone was asking about the spreadsheet. So this is this data. If all of this data gets updated from this point and it moves to this particular point, this log, the log of what was here before and what was here before is kept. The new update is also kept. So with that, with that information, you'll be able to keep track of every operation that is happening on the file system. You understand? So it keeps a transaction log. So what was there at 5 p.m. was 1. At 6 p.m. it gets updated to 2. By 8 p.m. it gets updated to 16. You know, those are transactions that are happening. So for all of those transactions, a log is kept. A log is kept, and that will help you to be able to keep track of whatever changes that is happening within the file system. That's number one. Number two, when you have a big file, you have a big file, you have a big data set. You know, the data might be spread across maybe data node 1, data node 2, and data node 3, or it may be spread across disk 1 and disk 2 and disk 3, for instance. How do you know that it is the remaining part of the data that is here? How do you know that it's the remaining part of the data that is here? How do you know? It uses a checksum, which is like like an algorithm to verify if we are the same family. You know, traditionally in Nigeria we use tribal mark. If I want to know whether you came from my village, I give you a tribal mark. Write it like this. You know. I saw a pretty lady one day. I was coming to the office. She had this tribal mark, and I was not very happy with the parents of that girl. I don't know her parents. So she had the tribal mark like they just cut her and they just slashed her like this. It's not fair. It's not fair to cut a pretty girl like that. That's it. So checksum is just like that mark that you put on the different components of the file in such a way that when you need to combine the files together again, it is that checksum that you use to know that, okay, this is a part of me. This is a part of me, so we can combine together. So HDFS also uses data block to, so there's a lot of replica. So data is replicated. So HDFS also replicates data across data block. So if this is a data block, and this is a data block, and this is a data block, and this is another data block, the replication is done in such a way that, so maybe you want to store a piece of information on this disk. On this disk, there are blocks. On this disk, there are blocks. You know, so data that is stored on a block on this disk is replicated on another block on this disk. That data is also replicated on another data node that is on a different server. So the data is replicated on this disk, is replicated on this second disk, is replicated on this, is replicated on another server somewhere else, and is replicated on another random location. So there are about 4 different, by default, there are at least about 4 different replicas of data on Hadoop.
So would that explain message? So if you send messages to somebody,
you need to project so that they can hear your voice.
I was asking message in general.
Yes.
What came to my head was, let's say, a WhatsApp message.
Yes.
So if you send somebody a message,
yes,
you delete it.
Yes.
It tells you that you deleted the message.
Yes.
From what I'm hearing, does that mean that WhatsApp has a copy of the data of the message you sent on 2 disk spaces? Then on another server, and another server, there's a copy of that same message.
So, so this is what WhatsApp does, or this is what WhatsApp would be doing normally. You sent me a message now. That message, of course, is going to be saved on the. So let's assume this is WhatsApp. So WhatsApp has 3 servers. So you sent a message from your phone. That message is going to be saved on a block, on a disk, on a server. That same message will be replicated on another disk, on another block, on another disk, on the same server. But WhatsApp knows that, see, anything can happen to our server. And if anything happens to our server, that means that our customer will no longer be able to access their messages. It's going to be a big deal. You just wake up one day, you can no longer access your WhatsApp messages. So what it does is that it will now replicate that same message on another disk that is on another server somewhere. Then, just to be on the safe side, it will now replicate a 4th version on another random disk somewhere. WhatsApp is definitely going to have more than 3 servers. It would have like millions of servers spread across. That's why they can support more than 1 billion people in the whole world. So you understand? Seamlessly. So they are going to have a whole lot of servers somewhere. So now, when you initiate the delete, if you initiate that delete, that data, so you know when you want to delete, there are 2 ways of deleting. You can either delete in a way that it's other people who send that message to can still access it, but you cannot access it again. And you can also delete in such a way that anybody that has accessed it will no longer be able to access it. So let's assume it's the second one. You don't want anybody to be able to access it. What it does is that it makes sure that that data is no longer accessible across all the different disks, everything. WhatsApp may have it. WhatsApp said that they have it, although it's encrypted in such a way that nobody else can go and do a backdoor access to the data. Sure, you understand? But the fact is that that data is no longer accessible. It's no longer accessible. Now, so essentially that is how it was. It's replicated across all the different disks. If you send another one, it's available and replicated across all different disks. If you delete, immediately you delete. If immediately you delete, then that access to the data is revoked and no other user will be able to access it, including you, if that is the kind of instruction that you issue. So essentially, that is how it works. And then it also has what is called data pipeline that supports movement of data across servers. So, data that is stored in a particular location, if this disk is getting filled up in such a way that it can no longer be manageable, they can use data pipeline to share that data across other disks. So between these disks, there can be communication between this disk and this disk through what is called data pipeline. Those are some of the features of HDFS. Then a few more information about the data block, because I think I've mentioned stuff around data block. So is the block, is that data block within the, so the architecture, the way it is, there is data block. The block is on a disk. The disk is on a data node. The data node is on a server. The server is on a cluster. You said? Okay, I should come again. So here is a disk. On this disk, there are data blocks on this disk. There are data blocks on this disk. And so you have data blocks, then you have disk. The next level, there are disk. Then you have data nodes. A number of disks will make up the data node. The data node will be in a server, and there could be many data nodes. As you have in this case, there could be many data nodes in a server, and then the server will belong to a cluster. A number of servers will make up a cluster. So you need to understand that hierarchy. So that hierarchy too will also inform how the data is replicated. Data will also be replicated across in such a way that even if a server goes down, your data would still be available. If a disk goes down, your data will still be available. If a data block gets corrupt, your data will still be available. Sure, you understand? So
everybody still access their data when it came back up because nothing was lost or
Fatima, are you with me? I've not heard you say anything this afternoon. Okay, so I'm very confident. I know how the online classes work, and that was why we decided to invent the hybrid class. At times, yeah, people may actually be by their PC, but they're actually gone. They're actually gone. So it's good once in a while you try to call people out to see if they are following. So the data itself is stored on the data block in the file system of the server. So the data is stored on the data block or in the file system of the server. And whenever you want to retrieve the data, you retrieve it from the data block. So it also stores the metadata of a block. So data block also stores information about the metadata of a block. So when we say there's metadata of a block will have a size. A block will have a size. A block would have a creation date. A block will also have some other properties. So, a block will be configured to be able to handle a particular type of data. So the data block also stores information about the metadata of a block. It performs this checksum validation. You remember we talked about checksum, which is that property that a file would have that will make it in such a way that if it's distributed across multiple disks, you'll be able to combine it together. So the data blocks also performs that validation. So it performs the validation to be able to ensure that it is the same file that is being accessed at a time, or it's a different file that is accessed at a particular point. It sends regular reports to name node. So it sends regular reports to name node, and then it supports direct access to data nodes from a client application. So you can write a program. You can write an application that directly references what you have on the data block. So that's what it's saying. And it forwards the data to other data nodes based on the pipelining model. I explained pipelining just now. A disk communicates with each other. So disk communicates with each other. A disk can get feed up and then it spills its data to other disks. You understand? So that process is called pipelining, and is a data block that facilitates that kind of communication. So how block is placed, I think I have explained this part. It keeps one replica of every block locally. he keeps one replica of every block locally. Then he places a second replica on a different rack to guard against complete rack failure. Then he keeps a third replica on the same remote rack, but to different server in the rack. And the fourth, and there's another, he sends another additional replica to a random location in local or in a remote cluster. So this is very important to understand this. So this is data that you're saving in here. It creates a replica within this particular location. So this is local to it creates a replica within this within the disk here. So on this local disk creates a replica here. Within this data node on the same server, it creates another replica. Then it sends another one to another server that is somewhere else, and then it sends another one to a remote location, a random location. Just send it to any random location. So why it does that is just to be able to safeguard against failure and to guarantee availability.
Sorry, but the random location is still under the, let's say, company that owns the service.
Definitely, yes, of course. Yeah, it's still within. It's not just, of course, if it's some other place, you may not have access to save it. So it's still going to be within the whole infrastructure itself. And okay, so essentially that's those are the details around HDFS. I want us to look at I want us to look at something else apart from HDFS. We'll spend time on HDFS. Let's look at other elements of the Hadoop. So we've talked about HDFS. And there's a very quick question here. What is the function of data node and name node in HDFS? You know, it's a question, but I'll give that to you at a homework. So next week Friday, sorry, when we come back again, I think this is the first question I'm going to be asking you guys. So I'm telling you ahead of time now. I'm telling you ahead of time now. Yeah, so I'm telling you ahead of time so that you can be prepared. So there is HDFS, there is MapReduce, and there is Yarn. So let's look at Yarn. Let's look at MapReduce. So MapReduce, as I said, it's an algorithm. It's not like a software like when you say that
Microsoft Office, like more a tool.
So MapReduce it's a programming, what they call it is like a programming framework. So for instance, you can, I'm looking for a very good example. I'm looking for a very good example of what I can use to explain what MapReduce does. So MapReduce is it's not like a real software. It's not like a real software. It's like a way of doing things within the Hadoop framework. It's like a way of doing things. And that way of doing things is defined by a set of algorithm or it. And that the name of that algorithm is called MapReduce. You have a big job. You have a big data that is sent to you. That data needs to be divided, needs to be broken down. But the data can come in different formats. If it comes in form of numbers, you can go and divide it. You can first of all arrange them in the descending order, and then go in the middle and divide it and keep dividing it that way. But if it comes as a text, your approach will be different. If it comes as a picture, your approach will be different. If it comes as a video, the approach will be different. That approach, the implementation of that approach is the MapReduce is the programming implementation of that approach, and it's called divide and conquer approach. So it's an implementation of the algorithm developed and maintained by the Apache Hadoop project. here it said that it's Google that actually popularized it, and it's used to simplify data processing across massive set of data. When you have a lot of data, this is one way of simplifying data processing. And the process starts with a user request to run a MapReduce program. So anytime you want to execute MapReduce, it starts with a user implementing a MapReduce program, and it continues until the results are written back. So I'll give you an example. Let me give you a live example. In the bank, there's a table. I hope you can relate to what a table is. A table is like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's not like Excel. But you just imagine what is Excel spreadsheet, rows and columns. So when you do transaction, when you do maybe online transaction, internet banking transaction, that you need to write the purpose of a particular of that transaction, you can write it anyhow. So maybe you are paying for DSTV. Sure, you understand? If you do that, if you wire the money, you can write DSTV. Another person can write cable TV. Another person can write satellite TV. But it is just another person can write TV subscription. But see on TV, sure, you understand? Now the banks. So because there is no structured way of writing that narration, but the bank itself is interested in that narration because they want to know what people are spending their money on. If banks know what people are spending their money on, they can go and develop a product around that, or they can go and enter into partnership with DSTV. You understand? Because they have seen that a lot of people are paying DSTV through their platform. You understand? They can go and enter a partnership with DSTV to be doing collection for DSTV. You get? Now that column where the data is written is not structured. If you want to analyze it, Excel cannot analyze that type of data because the data is so unstructured that it's very difficult to analyze. MapReduce program can analyze that kind of data in 30 seconds. MapReduce program can analyze that type of data in 30 seconds. In 30 seconds. SQL may analyze it, but it may take a very long time for SQL to be able to analyze that type of data. But MapReduce can analyze it in just 30 seconds using MapReduce program. And the way it is that the user will have to develop a MapReduce program in order to be able to solve that problem. So it's not like there's a generic MapReduce program for any type of big data problem that you need to solve. You as a data analyst or as a data engineer will still need to customize it for it to fit the purpose that you need it for. You understand? That sounds a little bit discouraging. MapReduce is a tool that helps businesses and organizations to handle unstructured data or semi-structured data. And that is the example I just gave. When the data is not structured, if the data is structured, your SQL can be very good at handling structured data. Excel, to some extent, can handle structured data. But when that data is semi-structured, it looks structured, but it's not structured. Or maybe you want to analyze all the messages that people have sent to you on WhatsApp. For instance, you want to analyze, okay, what are the most frequently occurring words in all the messages that people have sent to you on WhatsApp? What are the most frequently occurring words? MapReduce can help you to quickly do that kind of analysis as against maybe you want to use Excel to analyze it. Yeah. So if you have any question, Temi, Ekwi, please feel free to ask me your question. Fatima, please feel free to ask me your question. Dorcas, I did not meet you. Please feel free to ask me your question at any point in time. So how MapReduce works is that it consists of two primary processes. There is a map component and there is a reduce component. The map component is what does the slicing. The reduce component is what does the combination. But at times you think that okay, it should be the reduce component that reduces the big problem into smaller, but it's the other way around. Map is what does the slicing of the big data job into smaller components, and reduce is what that combines the result back into a whole. So maybe this is like an example of a MapReduce job where the input file is split by the input file is split by the map program. It partitions the file into different components, and then it now sorts. It partitions the file into different components, and then executes the job. After executing the job, it sorts the results and then combines the results using the reduce program and returns the output back, and is written back to a file. It looks very simple. It's a very simple implementation, but you might need to understand a little bit of Java in order to be able to do this. Although Python can also write a MapReduce program. So it's not very user friendly like that, and it's part of the limitations of MapReduce. So a MapReduce worker processes the data that is received from the master and sends the result back to the master. Of course, so this is the job received. This is the job received. The job is received. The job is split. After the job is split through a map process, then it's passed on to the executioner or the process that needs to execute it. After the process executes it, the result is sorted, maybe in a particular order, and then it's combined. After it's combined, then the output is written back into the HDFS program. Each MapReduce worker runs the same code against every portion of the data. So that is what happens. It runs the same code. It splits the data into smaller components. Then the job runs the same is the same operation that is performed on every component of that data. And then it now integrates the result that is received from different workers into a final result. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of MapReduce. Or I can allow you to just read it up. It's something that is very simple. But the best way you can actually appreciate this is, if you have worked in a database environment, like an Oracle environment, MySQL environment, SQL Server environment, it should be able to help you to appreciate the advantages that it brings to the table, and to also help you to understand some of the limitations of Hadoop. MapReduce can handle some issues a lot better than how relational database system will handle it. When it comes to unstructured data, I gave you the example of a bank. What it would take Oracle like maybe 30 minutes to be able to analyze. MapReduce may analyze it within 3 seconds, and then it returns back your result back to you. And so, and it's best suited for data that are not structured. It's best suited for data that is not structured. MapReduce is at its best when most of the data from a large set of input data is not required for analysis. So at times when there may be a lot of data, but it's not all of those data you need for analysis. It's just maybe a component of the data that you need for analysis. So MapReduce can get that kind of analysis done a lot faster. It can sort data irrespective of the size of that data. No matter how big the size of the data is, it can help you to quickly sort it and returns the result and extract what is important from that data. It's like an ETL tool. ETL tool is ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So MapReduce can be used like an ETL tool to extract data from to extract what is important from a particular data set and transform it and then load it into a new environment where you want it. And yeah, so those are the strength of MapReduce. It's not interesting except when you are practicing it. So next week Friday and Saturday, we are just practicing. Friday and Saturday we are practicing. We are not. So on your textbook there is a workbook. You have your training kit is 3-in-1. So what we are going to be practicing, we are going to be practicing what we have on pages 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to page 22. So those are things that we are going to be practicing. So please, it's very important. So with that, you'll be able to relate with some of these things. So please, I beg you, I need you to set up the virtual learning environment. You don't have it. You have set it up. Okay. Okay. So Temilade, Dorcas, Ekwe, please, if you can come around to the, although you can download the material online. And Temilade, do you have it set up on your PC?
Yes, you helped me. I kept so.
I've forgotten. Okay, Dorcas, do you have it set up on your PC?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it would be good you set it up. And Ekwe has said that she also does not have it. So if you can come into the office within the week to set it up, although you can do the setup by yourself without necessarily coming around. There's a place you download it from. You can download it from. I'll show you where to download it from. You can actually download it by yourself and do the setup all by yourself in case. You are not in Lagos. For those that are not in Lagos that are connected to the class. So in terms of weakness, MapReduce is not like a database. It's not like a relational or a traditional database that has some functionality like indexing, security. So for a database, before you log into a database, you need to like log in with a username and a password. Before you log into a database, there's a user access, there's indexing. The way that indexing works is that it helps for referencing what you have in a database. For MapReduce does not have some of those functionality. It does not have query optimizer. It does not have process optimizer. Even though it does its job efficiently, but it does not have some of those functionality. Every time you might need to always write your own MapReduce program. Every time, although the syntax looks almost the same, but every time you might always need to come up with your own MapReduce program. So that some people may never want that. So not so many people like to configure it. Not so many people like to code it. But the more you code it, the more you become very conversant with it. And it is not aware of other processes that are running simultaneously. So it just considers every job as an entity in itself. It does not consider other processes that are running in the background. You just go and get the stuff done without caring about other jobs in the background. Caring about that job in the background will help you to care about your memory utilization, your CPU utilization time, and every other thing. But MapReduce does not care about that. If he needs to use all the processor to get your job done, he just gets it done without caring about that stuff that is running in the background. And this is the part that most people don't like. It's more or less going to be custom coded. It's more or less going to be every time you need to code it, you need to customize it your own way. So next week, as part of the practicals too, we also run through the other components like Yarn, like a school, like Hive. We run through other components. But next week will be dedicated to practicals. So please, I want you to be prepared for practicals by the time we come next week. Feel free to ask me any question. I want to be conscious of your time, so I don't want to extend the class beyond 2 p.m. because it's Saturday. I know somebody is at a function, is attending this class from maybe a party or something like that. So when the person is talking, you'll be hearing some noise in the background. So we want to respect people's time. But please read up your material. Next week, we do a recap and we do a lot of hands-on session for you to practice what we have been learning so far. And if you have any question, please feel free to ask me any question. If there is none, I want to wish you a nice weekend. Raise your voice so that they can hear.
No, it's just like the processor now. Like when you have 3 processors,
yes,
and 1 memory,
yes,
is it possible, like, for you to create a memory in the processor?
That is in-memory computing. Yes,
It is possible.
yes. Yes, I explained that now. That is in-memory computing.
Okay.
So that is the concept of in-memory computing, where before now, memory is independent of processor. So there's what they call bus technology, BUS technology. So it is the technology that facilitates communication between the back and forth, between the memory and the processor. But that back and forth will become expensive when the data is so much, it's big data. So to minimize that back and forth, let's implement that memory in such a way that it is now going to be on the processor itself. That is in-memory computing. Any other question? Timilade, any question? Ekri, any question for me? Timmy, okay, over to you. Okay, no question. Ekri, what about you?
I said none for now.
Okay, thank you. Dorcas, any question? Okay, so thank you. Okay, Dorcas says no question from me too. Okay, thank you very much. So next week, I'm definitely going to have questions for you guys. And I'm going to send my questions before next week. I'll send my questions to you through email ahead of next week. So at least we'll spend some time to discuss those questions before we proceed. Thank you very much. Do have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you, Blessing. Bye.
Bye-bye.